Now by political analyst and economist with Political Futures Consultancy, Daniel Silke. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to talk to you. You've sent out an interesting tweet. You're saying there's much skepticism for fair and efficient distribution of this vaccine for South Africa. It's more than just the health of a nation at stake. It may be the ultimate test for the Ramaphosa presidency. Tell us more.
Yes, Sally, good to be with you. Look, I think we've seen President Ramaphosa survive with public sentiment in quite positive terms for quite a long time. But ultimately, I think the real test here now is to provide an efficient and credible and equitable rollout of the vaccine. There is a huge degree of skepticism for the ability of the state to undertake such a difficult project, especially in the light of just the last few days and last few weeks of ongoing allegations of corruption in the PPE saga in Gauteng in particular and other related issues. I think the state really has to come to the party here. And it is a test, therefore, for President Ramaphosa. Amidst the backdrop of a firmament within the ANC on all sorts of divisive issues like Jacob Zuma that you've been talking about, the Premier of the Northwest that's been suspended, for President Ramaphosa, this is really the chance, I suppose, to come out ahead. Not just in terms of procuring the vaccine for South Africans and keeping them healthy, but in terms of his own political survival into the future as well.
So, Daniel, let's expand a bit more on this conversation and talk about the vaccination process. We're hoping to get 40 million doses eventually, but the reality is that it's going to take a very long time to get 40 million people vaccinated in South Africa. When we look at the way forward and growing our economy, given that and the delay in the vaccination process, how long will it take for us to recover?
Well, you're right that there has been a delay in procuring the vaccine. We've at least made a start today. It is significant for us. And I think as we move towards a rollout with greater numbers of vaccines entering the country, we will see a greater degree of positivity, I think, about perhaps restoring or at least attempting to reboot this economy. But I do think that we are going to languish at very low growth rates. We've seen the World Bank come out with estimations for our GDP growth over this year and into the 21 and 22 period. And really, when you compare South Africa to most of her other developing country peers, we really are at the very low end of the growth projections over the next 2 years. It's not just about COVID, for that matter. It's about getting that broader economic policy environment correct in order to sustain and kickstart growth. Now, COVID has set us back, obviously, in terms of the closure of business and the cost to the economy. But before COVID, as I keep on saying, our economy was already in jeopardy. It was already in recession. So COVID really has simply exacerbated many of the same structural economic policy constraints that we were talking about a year, 18 months ago. And the real test will be whether we can, alongside the vaccine rollout, can we also roll out a growth plan for South Africa, not just a redistribution plan for South Africa, but a plan that really gets growth going within the country and creates jobs. And that's the two challenges running simultaneously in South Africa: vaccines and economic policy change.
And if we look at the liquor industry, the 3 alcohol bans have led directly to disinvestment and to investment plans being put on hold, some really significant disinvestment, and that means jobs on the line. Do you think that it is a no-brainer and absolutely critical that the alcohol ban is lifted this evening?
I certainly agree that we need to lift large portions of the alcohol ban. I think there are certain restrictions that you can put on alcohol, limiting the sale of alcohol for that matter, under certain conditions. We could have always been much more nuanced in our approach rather than sort of the blunt ban that we have. We simply didn't have the capability to enforce a nuanced approach, so that's why we went with the blunt approach, and that's what we've got. Now, yes, it helped keep those trauma patients down, and it freed up capacity in our hospitals during the worst of the second wave. So even against my own view, it did help, and I think we have to acknowledge that. But it's time now, with all of the indicators showing a good downward path for COVID cases, as we've discussed before, it's time now to review the liquor legislation in its entirety, I would argue. I think the liquor companies themselves are very willing to come to the table. But I certainly think that from the authority side, we need to police illegal liquor in South Africa. Up to 25% of liquor supplied doesn't even come through the legitimate channels. And if we really are to have proper political will about taking this issue of managing liquor consumption in South Africa seriously, we really need to beef up our authorities. Don't just penalize the legitimate purveyors of selling liquor. We need to penalize those that are clearly involved in nefarious schemes to provide South Africans with illegally procured liquor as well.
Thank you very much. Political analyst and economist with Political Futures Consultancy, Daniel Silke.